Good evening, folks. Tonight we're going to talk about the limbic system. So last night we talked about the brain stem, and just to review, this is this part down here. So we talked about it having four major parts: the medulla at the bottom, which controls breathing and heart rate; the pons, which controls arousal; we have the reticular formation, which also has to do with arousal; and the thalamus on the top, right around here, which has to do with the, it is a router for all the sensory information. So all the sensory information comes up the brainstem, it gets processed through the thalamus, and then gets distributed wherever it needs to go. So today we're going to talk about this limbic system, and the reason it's called this limbic border system is because it borders this simplistic part of the brain, this brainstem, and the cerebral cortex, which is one of the most complex parts of the brain. So it's called a border system because it exists on the border of these two areas. Also, it exists on the border between the left and the right hemispheres. So this limbic system controls some of our more base emotions, such as fear and aggression. It also controls our basic drives, such as hunger, thirst, sex, and it also helps us form episodic memories, which is interesting, I think. So the limbic system has to do with these really base emotions: fear, aggression, hunger, sex. All these things that we don't really think about are just kind of like almost holdovers from when we were mammals, just scrounging around the ground in trees before we had language, before we had complex thought. We were still fearful, aggressive, we wanted to eat, and we wanted to have sex. These are basic mammalian characteristics. So this limbic system has three main parts. The first part that we'll talk about, and we've mentioned it in our last, or in our memory unit, I should say, is the hippocampus. So this processes conscious episodic memories. Remember these effortful memories? And it works with the amygdala to form emotionally charged memories. So this is why we have these flashbulb memories, is because the closeness and proximity of the hippocampus and the amygdala. So we see this close relationship between episodic memories in the hippocampus and emotions, base emotions such as fear and aggression, in the amygdala. Now remember we talked about that guy Clive, we watched that video, that poor British guy who couldn't make new episodic memories. The same thing with Leonard on Memento. He had damage to his hippocampus, both these guys did, so they were unable to make new episodic memories. Now this amygdala area consists of two very small, kind of lima bean sized neural clusters, and it exists, as you can see right at here, on the top of the thalamus, in between the hippocampus and the brainstem, and it processes emotions such as fear and aggression, especially fear and aggression. So let's look at the amygdala a little closer. So we found out by experimenting on cats, again, I don't know whose idea was it to take old Mr. Feline out of the house and attract electrodes to his brain and stimulate his amygdala. Nonetheless, they did this, and they found that cats have this reaction when you provoke the amygdala in a very specific part of the amygdala. One side of it produces this aggressive response. So cats kind of arch their back, they get literally filled with electrical impulses. Look at that, their hair standing on end. If you stimulate the other side of the amygdala, however, it produces this fear response. So one side of the amygdala produces aggression, as you can see here. The other side produces fear. So they put this electrode in this poor cat's head, stimulated the other side, put him in a cage with a mouse, and the cat cowered in terror. So one side of the amygdala regulates aggressiveness and anger, the other side fear. Now this hypothalamus, on the other hand, as you can see, hypo meaning below, it's below the regular thalamus and in between the pituitary gland and the amygdala. This regulates things like body temperature, adequate food and water intake, also known as homeostasis. Just so you know, homeostasis is maintaining a regular stability of your body. So we need to regulate our heat, we need to regulate our nutrient intake, we need to regulate how much water we intake. So that's homeostasis. And the hypothalamus controls this. It's also involved in our sex drive. So this hypothalamus, again, like the amygdala, has to do with these more basic human phenomena. And it directs the endocrine system via messages to the pituitary gland. So the hypothalamus is kind of in charge of the endocrine system, but it routes these messages through the pituitary gland, which then kind of tells what the endocrine system to do. So the hypothalamus is also known as our reward center. So we get pleasure if the hypothalamus is stimulated. So they did this in another experiment where they attached this electrode to this rat's brain, and on this lever right here, if they stimulated it, it resulted in the rat's pleasure center getting stimulated. Now, rats really like that. It turns out they actually like that better than food. So what they did is they electrified this grid right here, and the rats knew it was electrified, but they didn't care. They went right across the grid and got that stimulation regardless of the pain that they felt right there. So this proved to us that the hypothalamus has to do with this reward center. It gives us pleasure when we do things that are not harmful to the body, that are actually beneficial to the body. So the hypothalamus, it's involved in sex drive, it's involved in homeostasis, regulating body temperature, but it's also our reward center, as well as directing messages to the endocrine system. So this hypothalamus has a bunch of functions. It's a complex aspect of our brain that functions in a multitude of ways. So let's just review our basic brain structure. So as we can see, we have, if we start with the brainstem, we have the spinal cord down here, the medulla, the reticular formation helps control arousal, the medulla controls heartbeat and breathing down here, the pituitary gland has to do with the growth hormone, but also is the master control of our endocrine gland, or master control of all of our endocrine glands, the endocrine system. And then we have the hypothalamus, which controls homeostasis, functions such as eating, helps govern this endocrine system, so it tells the pituitary gland what to do, and then the pituitary gland tells the endocrine system what to do. We have the thalamus, which relays messages between the lower brain centers, this amygdala, brainstem, pituitary gland, medulla area, and the more complex area, the cerebral cortex, which we're going to get into tomorrow. And we also have this amygdala, as I mentioned, and this hippocampus, which is the kind of the area where these flashbulb memories are formed, because we have one having to do with memory, the hippocampus, and the other having to do with the most emotion. And the proximity of the two is what allows flashbulb memories to form. Alright folks, I hope your brain isn't overloaded with knowledge of itself. If it is, take a nice break, relax, and process this. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good evening.